Good afternoon, good people and good friends of alternative venues for jazz. I'm Willard Jenkins, and I am today's guest on the daily alternative venues for jazz presentation. It's a pleasure to be here, and certainly a pleasure to support my good sister Gail Boyd. Gail and I have been connected for many years since the time that she first became an artist manager, and I was doing some writing for her productions, and always a pleasure. For those of you who don't know me, I am a journalist and broadcaster and an author. I had the great pleasure of working with Randy Weston, NEA Jazz Master Randy Weston, on his memoirs, his autobiography, which is called African Rhythms, composed by Randy Weston and arranged by Willard Jenkins, as the legend has it. And I'm also a broadcaster at WPFW in Washington currently. I've been at WPFW for 30 years now as a weekly jazz broadcaster, and that's certainly a pleasure because these things kind of intertwine at a certain point. These various affiliations, and the broadcasting gives me a certain weekly platform that I've been very happy and pleased with WPFW providing me with that platform, Pacifica Radio in Washington, D.C. And in addition to writing and broadcasting, I'm also a festivals and concert series artistic director and curator. And my affiliations in that regard actually go back to a time in the 1970s. Yes, the late 1970s, for an organization called the Northeast Ohio Jazz Society, which was based in Cleveland and for many years was the most prominent jazz presenting organization in Cleveland, Ohio. And it was my pleasure to curate various concerts for the Northeast Ohio Jazz Society. And during that time, I had an opportunity to participate in the planning committee for the Tri-C Jazz Fest. And Tri-C Jazz Fest has been operating in Cleveland for decades, and it's a great festival based primarily in education and also with an exceptional concert component. I later served as the artistic director of Tri-C Jazz Fest for 18 years. And then in 2015, I was invited by Sonny Sumter and the board of directors of the DC Jazz Fest here in Washington, D.C., to be the artistic director of the DC Jazz Fest, which, again, I've been since 2015, and what a pleasure that's been. It's a great opportunity to present both master level and emerging artists, and also to provide a platform for the DMV, Washington Metro area's exceptional, I mean exceptional, cast of jazz artists. We have some wonderful jazz artists here in the DC metro area, and the DC Jazz Festival certainly provides them with a platform because we are a citywide festival. We pride ourselves in being a citywide festival. And if you know Washington, D.C., you know it's divided into four quadrants: Northeast, Northwest, Southeast, and Southwest. We actually present programs in all four quadrants of the city and in over 50 neighborhoods. And a lot of our programming is free, and much of it involves DC and DMV based jazz artists. And so we take great pride in that and being a citywide festival. And I say that, I guess, with a certain amount of pain right now because as I'm thinking about it, we would have been in the midst of the 16th annual DC Jazz Festival right now. Our 16th annual festival was scheduled for June 12th to 21st, culminating on Father's Day this Sunday. But unfortunately, the pandemic had its say, and we had to postpone our festival. And I emphasize postpone as opposed to cancel. We felt like it was incumbent upon us to be a bit ahead of the curve, and so we actually postponed DC Jazz Festival uh, back on March 15th, shortly after the NBA shut down, because it appeared to our board and staff that this pandemic was going to last well throughout the summer of 2020. So we felt it was incumbent upon us to postpone the festival. And so we postponed our festival, and we have great interest in presenting a bit of an abbreviated version of the DC Jazz Festival in September. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we have a series of presentations that are running from June 21st to June 29th. We have partnered with the good folks from Live from Our Living Rooms, and we're presenting a series of presentations June 21st to 29th that will include performances and interviews and master classes. And we've got some great artists lined up, including Regina Carter and Alvester Garnett, Joe Lovano and Judy Silvano, the wonderful cellist Akua Dixon, who's going to be performing with her children, Dave Douglas, Orrin Evans, Chelsea Green, DC's own Aaron Myers, and Reginald Cinci, a fine vocalist and pianist and trombonist, respectively. And Reginald Cinci is also the director of jazz education at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And we're featuring our own education director, Heidi Martin, saxophonist Elijah Jamal Balbed, bassist Taurus Mateen. Some of you remember him from Betty Carter and also from Jason Moran's Bandwagon. Warren Wolf, the multi-instrumentalist, saxophonist Marcus Strickland, bassist John Clayton and his son Gerald Clayton, pianist Emmett Cohen, and the cutting-edge young saxophonist Sarah Hughes. That's the kind of program we are presenting during our Live from Our Living Room series, which starts this Sunday, June 21st, with someone that I left out of that list, and that's the great Dee Dee Bridgewater. I'm doing an interview with NEA Jazz Master Dee Dee Bridgewater on Sunday, June 21st, starting at 3 p.m. You can find out more about our Live from Our Living Room series at the DC Jazz Festival Facebook page and also at our website, which is dcjazzfest.org. So please join us from our Live from Our Living Room series. And those are the kinds of things. This series, this virtual series, is coming up June 21st to 29th. And then we are hoping, of course, based upon the reopening plans of the city of DC, we're hoping to have a series of programs for audiences, series of live programming for audiences in September. So do stay tuned for that, September 21st to 25th. And that's how we've kind of retrenched in the face of this pandemic and the fact that we did have to postpone our festival until then. But I emphasize again, postpone as opposed to outright canceling. So do stay tuned to dcjazzfest.org to get a better sense of what we'll be doing at DC Jazz Fest. Now, Gail has asked me a few questions. She wanted to ask about my radio program. My radio program is called Ancient Future Radio, and it's Wednesday nights from 10 until midnight on WPFW, which is 89.3 FM in the DMV, but which you can also stream online at wpfwfm.org. And the whole concept behind the program, the reason it's called Ancient Future Radio, is because we play the classic and the contemporary sounds. And in lieu of, unfortunately, the summer jazz festival season being pretty much wiped out by this pandemic, I decided that with all of the great recordings that have been made at various festivals around the world, that for the whole summer of 2020, we would present on my program a virtual jazz festival of the air. So we're presenting great jazz performances from around the world during the 10 to 11 p.m. hour. And then traditionally from 11 till midnight, it's what we call What's New, the new release hour. And that's where I focus solely on new and recent releases. So again, it's called Ancient Future Radio, and it's at WPFW in Washington, 89.3 FM on the dial for terrestrial radio, and streaming online at WPFWFM.org. So I would invite you to join me streaming from wherever you are for Ancient Future Radio. That particular idea of presenting the classic and the contemporary is pretty much a philosophy that drives everything I do, because I always want to honor the tradition of this music and also to honor the contemporary side of the music, and to continue to push the envelope that we have jazz musicians who are creating new and incredible work on a daily basis. We have jazz musicians arriving from the academy and from the various training programs on a near daily basis. I've always maintained that, I'm never interested in hearing people talk about, whoa, jazz is dead, jazz is dying. What happened? What's happening to jazz? Listen, the strongest sector of the jazz community is jazz education. Jazz education keeps getting better internationally, producing musicians all the time, producing new musicians all the time. It's just incredible with the combination of musicians arriving from the academy and the fact that it has become simplified for artists to make their own recordings. The number of new releases that continue to come out is just incredible. So any issues we have related to this music and the fact that jazz music is underappreciated has absolutely nothing to do with the musicians. The musicians are doing their job. They are coming around, they are creating, they're coming out of these institutions and they're creating and they're making wonderful music. There's some wonderful music out here today. The biggest issue with this music we call jazz is audience development. And when I think about the whole aspect of audience development, I go back to the times that I've had the pleasure of teaching jazz survey and jazz history courses on the college and university level. And invariably, my courses would be based upon essay exams. You have a midterm and a finals. And on the final exam, the last question that I would ask on the final is a throwaway question that no matter what you said, the students would get the full credit for that last question. And the last question would be basically, what did you learn, or what information, or what did you learn new from taking this course? Invariably, on so many occasions, I had students tell me, you opened up a whole new world of music for me. I didn't even know this music existed. Yes, we have people out here who don't know that this music we call jazz existed, or who haven't discovered that aspect or that style or that form of jazz which meets their needs and which meets their interests. Because when you think about jazz, This is not one style of music. Okay, jazz to me is an aesthetic umbrella under which all these various ways of playing, these various styles, these various forms exist. And I've always maintained that there's something for practically everyone in this jazz milieu. You just have to search, you have to look for it, you have to be exposed to it. So, again, audience development is our biggest issue with this music. We have to do a better job of developing the audience for this music. And I think the music as a music is a healthy, a very healthy and growing music because of the nature of all the wonderful musicians who are creating out here and making this music we call jazz. So that's just my kind of soapbox as far as how we go about propagating, promoting, and continuing the development of this great music we know of as jazz. Gail also asked me that as far as my work as a curator, and I mentioned also that besides the DC Jazz Festival, I am also the artistic director for jazz programming at Tribeca Performing Arts Center in New York. And we do a couple of different things at Tribeca. We, as a way of having a young artist series, we present the three finalist bands from each year's DC Jazz Prix. Now, the DC Jazz Prix is the DC Jazz Fest's annual band competition. We emphasize bands because we know that there are many, many individual competitions, like the Herbie Hancock competition and others, the Herbie Hancock, formerly the Monk competition. There are many individual artist competitions, but the band, the ensemble, is the essence of this music we call jazz. So we celebrate the band, the ensemble, and we have a band competition called DC Jazz Prix. And at Tribeca, every year we present a series of performances by the three finalist bands from the DC Jazz Prix. So that's our young artist component. And then we have a program called Lost Jazz Shrines. That was a program that was developed years ago, first by a woman named Mickey Shepard, who was at 651 Arts in Brooklyn and operated out of the old Majestic Theater, now the Harvey Theater on Fulton Street. And she engaged me as a consultant on the project, and we worked towards having a national consortium of presenting organizations for 1 year, which presented programs based upon the tradition of important jazz venues in those various communities, historic jazz venues, venues which made a difference on the jazz scene in those various communities. And I began working with Linda Herring at Tribeca Performing Arts Center at that same time because she wanted to be involved in the last Lost Jazz Shrines project. And as I did research for the first project that we did, which was honoring Cafe Society, it became clear that there was a whole lot there. When you talk about the New York metropolitan area, talk about primarily, and we actually carved out a niche for ourselves, Lost Jazz Shrines below 14th Street. There's a ton of great Lost Jazz Shrines below the 14th Street in Manhattan. So we've had years of programming honoring Lost Jazz Shrines in Manhattan. And we've continued that every year at Tribeca Performing Arts Center. And we present a concert based upon the flavor of what happened at those various Lost Jazz Shrines. And we have humanities programs like panel discussions and artist interviews and film screenings and that kind of thing to celebrate those great venues. Because as someone who has presented the music for years, I I've worked with a number of different venues, and I recognize the great importance, of course, of the musicians, but also the importance of those venues, those platforms that gave those musicians an opportunity and a platform to express their artistry. So I think that those particular places should be honored, and we do so with our Lost Jazz Shrines series at Tribeca. So that's what happens. That's what I'm up to on the presenting side. And I guess I'll pause here and ask if there are any questions. Okay, seeing no questions pop up, I guess I'll continue running off at the jibs, as they would say. But at any rate, Gail also asked me where and how do I find new talent to consider for my programming. And I take that in a number of different ways. I take that with the DC Jazz Fest platform, with the Tribeca platform, and certainly with my writing and with radio. And I am honored always to receive promotional recordings from artists and from publicists, and find and discover a lot of artists that way, from new and recent releases, and then artists, of course, reach out and provide their releases. And I have to say, as far as new releases, I'm old school. I need the physical media. Okay, the files, that's fine. Give me a chance to listen to something on my computer. But I need the physical media for my work. And so I discover artists that way. And of course, I get an opportunity to travel sometimes to great festivals. Festivals are always a welcome opportunity to travel because they give you a chance to hear a critical mass of artists and artistry and various expressions of this music. And, for example, annually go to the Monterey Jazz Festival. Always go to that one. And always discover something new in Tim Jackson's curating of that festival. I do admire the curating of so many of my colleagues at these various festivals. And, Bryce Rosenblum at the Winter Jazz Fest, and Danny Melnick and the things that he has done, and Christian McBride at Newport. I appreciate what these folks bring to the table in terms of presenting their festivals. And those festival trips, those festival opportunities definitely provide an opportunity to hear artists whom I may have only previously heard on record, and to see them live. And it's important, I think, to see these artists live before engaging them for our festival or for Tribeca. It's important because, for one thing, you want to see how particularly young artists, and this is particularly the case with young artists, how artists interact with their audiences. Do they address their audiences? I have much less appreciation for artists, no matter how well they're playing, how effectively they're playing, if they just come on stage, play their set, walk off the stage with barely an acknowledgement of the audience. I think artists need to address audiences. Artists really need to learn stagecraft. That's one thing I think that our jazz education programs have fallen short in terms of providing some sense of stagecraft with our artists. And that goes not only in terms of what information artists convey to an audience, but also how they look. Because, Charlie Parker actually said that the first thing they're going to know about you is what you look like, how you look as you come on stage or as you're on stage. So, let's say, dress the part. Okay? Dress the part and address your audience. Speak to the audience. The audiences, I've seen it on far too many occasions. I've seen where audiences are adversely affected by artists who do not communicate verbally with their audiences. You could play the greatest music in the world, but audiences really need to be communicated with. They need to know what you're playing. They also would love to get some sense of why you chose to play the way you play and why you make the choices you do. I mean, I recognize not everybody is going to be a great MC like uh, I think the greatest MC in the history of jazz was Cannonball Adderley. Not everybody's going to be Cannonball Adderley and be a great MC and be uh, almost a stand-up comedian. But you really need to work on addressing your audience and engaging your audience verbally. Artists often overlook how important that is for audiences and how important it is to communicate. So, artists, those of you out there, please communicate with your audience because they need that. They need that connection to your artistry and to why you've made the artistic choices that you've made and who you are. Because a lot of them, they really don't know who you are. They might know from reputation or from a recording, but they need to know who you are and why you made the choices you did. So as I say, I urge artists always to please communicate with your audiences, and that actually is part of our audience development responsibility. That's part of the artist's input and responsibility as far as audience development, because I think artists need to take more seriously the aspect of audience development and what they can do to assist those of us who present them, those of us who provide them with a platform, what they can do to assist us in developing this audience for jazz. Because we develop this audience for jazz, it's going to lead to better success factors for you as an artist. More audience, more gigs. Think about that, okay? Keep in mind that you do need to communicate with your audience. And where are we going next? Well, Gail asked me also in summation to give my feeling about when and how I think outdoor festivals will be able to safely go back to their original programming. Frankly, I don't see that in 2020. I'm hopeful that by...
You're right, Granddad. I love jazz. You're right, Granddad. I love jazz.
Yes, my grandson, he loves jazz. This is DQ. He loves jazz. See, so we get him started early. Let's start folks out early. Thank you, DQ. So let's see if we have any questions. Do we have any questions out here before we make our way? I see we got some great people out here checking us out. My man Mensa Wali and Scott Thompson and Maya Ridgman and Georgina Javor and Anthony Branker and Marlene Rosenberg and Reggie Sylvester. I see him out there. I see y'all out there. Let me know if y'all got any questions. Otherwise, I guess we are just about at the end of our conversation. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Gail Boyd. Gail Boyd is such a great sister, and the fact that she has worked hard to develop this Facebook group known as Alternative Venues for Jazz is important, because we need to start thinking about more alternative venues for jazz. And real quick, just to give you an example of a great alternative venue for jazz right here in the Washington metro area, There's Westminster Presbyterian Church, which every Friday evening presents live jazz and sells dinners, all for $5. And they get a huge audience, and it's just a party every Friday evening at Westminster Presbyterian Church. So I encourage all of you to go out into your communities and locate these alternative venues for jazz. Develop situations for yourself, for your artistry. Go talk to the pastor at your church and see if there might be a possibility on an off evening of developing a series. Go to your community center. All those kinds of alternative venues for jazz are very, very important for the continued propagation of this music. And once again, the DC Jazz Fest's Live from Our Living Room series will begin Sunday, June 21st and run through June 29th. And I'll be doing an interview with Dee Dee Bridgewater on Sunday, June 21st at 3 p.m. So if you go to the DC Jazz Festival Facebook page, you can find out more information, or go to www.dcjazzfest.org for complete information on our Live from Our Living Room series, which again features great people like Regina Carter and Akua Dixon, Dave Douglas, Orrin Evans, Joe Lovano, Elijah Jamal Baldbed, Warren Wolf, Marcus Strickland. So please join us for DC Jazz Fest Live from Our Living Rooms, which is a benefit for DC jazz musicians adversely affected by the pandemic. So please join us. And as I say on my radio program, until next time, we bid you peace.